I can't believe that prop had life. That was the worst part about the night. Like, just end the night with 10 points and let me be happy that it's not going to hit. Are you freaking kidding me?
What did he end up shooting on free throws?
I think it was 1 of 4. I don't remember. It was 1 of 4 in the third, so maybe a little more, actually. Find out the number. It was not ideal. 4 of 8. Okay.
Would have rather him go like 1 for 8.
Yeah, I know. That's a little bit more of a tease. Good morning. Welcome in. It's another edition of the NBA Strategy Show. We got a lot of strategy to talk about this big one-game showdown mode, FanDuel mode, everything that you need here from your MVP to your captain and beyond. Adam Scherer's in the house at ShipMyMoney DFS at Shander Show for me. And look, show brought to you by No House Advantage. We'll tell you all about the great things that you can take advantage of here on Awesemo. Last night we had 2 more games kind of furthering where we are so far in the playoffs. So just with this one tonight, now clearly things shifting, we'll try and take advantage of any narratives, any numbers, and anything in between. But as always, good morning, Adam, first and foremost.
Yeah, good morning. Glad to be here. Feeling a little bit better than I did last week, so moving in the right direction.
Yeah, you look a little more lively, I should say. That there's a little more life in your skin this morning.
Yeah, I mean, I remember to set an alarm last night. I actually intentionally woke up for the show, so we're making progress.
And look, you got to see some basketball last night, so it's not like you slept through everything, woke up at like 1 a.m. and we're up all night doing whatever. Any immediate quick reaction? I mean, the Suns are, I think, as legit as it gets. Clearly, Jamal Murray's absence is catching up to Denver. And I know at some point, so you might as well bring it up right now. You want to reopen the wound of Ben Simmons failing to get those 20 points. We brought it up yesterday, too, those 20 points and the victory that would have paid plus 460.
Yeah, Chris Paul is really, really good, I think, is the big takeaway from last night. And then, yeah, it's you and I were talking before the show, but you would just so much rather have another 4-point game from Ben Simmons than have him actually go out there and get 18 points on that.
Absolutely. I'd much rather go through and start defending, once again, the idiots here about why Ben Simmons is valuable and go through all of these conversations again than have that tease there last night. But look, you mentioned Chris Paul, the domination for Phoenix. Same thing happened with Philadelphia, pulling away from Atlanta eventually. So both series seem to be pretty much done, depending on if there's another game or so for Atlanta. But you're pretty confident right now that both Phoenix and Philadelphia are advancing to the conference finals?
Yeah, I feel pretty safe in that assumption.
Now, how safe do you feel about tonight? It just kind of, as we do, looking at the big picture, it's the one-game slate, so you always have to apply that strategy, but also you have to take into account the variables, which is this game. And look, to be fair to the first 2 that we've seen, super low scoring. Clippers somehow can get to 100 points, even though having 2 quarters at least with under 20 points. But looking at that kind of in the backdrop, Adam, how do you approach tonight?
Yeah, so I mean, going to LA, you have the Clippers favored. So I think there's a decent chance that there's a good chance that, the Clippers are leading in this game, or that the game at least, comes down to the wire, which is of course good on a 1-game slate. So, I think I think it should be a good game. I think the variables here are more so on the Clipper side. Well, obviously we have Mike Conley questionable, so that changes. That has the potential to change a lot of things. But on the Clipper side, we still don't really know what their rotation is going to look like, because they've changed it in each of the first 2 games. Last game, it still wasn't really that effective, the changes that they made. So I think a lot of the variables that we'll talk about are really just, what is Tyronn Lue going to do in this game?
Yeah, and they're, like we saw last night, foul trouble, a lot of exposure to Kevin Huerter on a bunch of lineups. Foul trouble limited him. Danny Green, my goodness, anybody rostering, there's that. Is it blue raspberry?
Yeah, blue raspberry.
Now, that's the go-to slushy for you, right?
Yeah, anything that I can get in blue raspberry flavor, I'll drink.
So normally, and this is what we were talking about ahead of time, especially with Chris, who's producing the show this morning, about how necessary it is when you go to 7-Eleven to mix the flavors. But you're so committed to the blue raspberry that's the one you can do solo.
Yeah, normally I mix everything, but I got there and it was like melon and mango and peach and blue raspberry. And yeah, I was just like, I just want straight blue raspberry.
those are hard fades, those flavors. You
Yeah,
can't work like a cherry, or they didn't have a cherry or anything.
They did have
like
cherry.
That?
They did have cherry.
Okay.
I thought about going blue raspberry plus cherry, but I don't know.
Okay.
I really like blue raspberry. I didn't want to mess it up.
All good. All good. I was going to say at the end before you caught me with the blue raspberry about Danny Green last night. I know that killed a lot of people as well. So there are going to be things that we just can't control. You go into it from foul trouble to injury. And unfortunately for a lot of people last night, they saw Danny Green hobble off, maybe thinking that there'd be some outside shots. So we do have to look at tonight with more controllable variables, I think. And you've seen Donovan Mitchell completely take over at times and be this star, this offensive powerhouse in this series. So mention switching to LA now. The expectation at the very least is the Clippers are going to do something to slow down Utah and get back into this series. So I don't know if you agree with overall that result, but also how that may factor into playing Mitchell, especially as a captain.
Yeah, I just don't really know that they have an answer for Mitchell. He's playing insanely well in this series. You know, the usage in the playoffs in general has been up, and it's carried over to the series too. You know, of course, the Clippers have good individual defenders in George and Kawhi, and, you know, they can try and throw Beverly at him as well. But they just haven't really had an answer. And if they continue to start Zubac, that's sure as hell not going to help either. So I'm just going right back to Donovan Mitchell. I mean, everything I think looks really good. And then you also got him playing 39 minutes last game, which is the most he's played in a game this postseason, and just, you know, reinforces that he's at full strength.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the injury concern, I feel like we're in Chris Paul territory with Mitchell, right? Where it was an afterthought that we were ever concerned about his performance on the floor.
Yeah, I have no concerns about the previous injury that he returned from at this point.
Is there any concern? I mean, again, one game slate and ownership we talk a lot about. I know that's a big pillar as far as how you maneuver through slates. And sometimes it's a big mitigating factor. Other times it's not that big or at all. So when you were looking at captain mode versus just rostering him, is there a difference between ownership that may be a factor for you?
So I'm trying to pull that up now. I got logged out on the site.
Hold on. I got it for you.
Okay, thanks.
Mitchell on DK right now is projected. Oh, wait. Ownership is not updated yet. So give me that. You know, we'll talk through it. All right. As we both try to get through.
We got it.
Talk through it.
We got it. 60% total ownership.
Okay.
11% captain for Mitchell, 49% utility.
So 11% captain, let's approach that first as far as that number. Is it low to the point where you think you can sneak in with value now simply on ownership?
Yeah, I think it's low. I mean, maybe this changes as we get closer to lock, but right now we have Paul George projected for 29% captain ownership. He's $600 less than Mitchell on DraftKings. To me, that makes absolutely no sense. Why, one, Paul George is getting more ownership, and two, why he's getting like 2.5 times as much ownership doesn't make a ton of sense to me.
All right. So yeah, that's a good place too to kind of pivot there. Is I'm seeing it on a bunch of crunched lineups here where Paul George is, and Kawhi Leonard as well. We'll talk about Kawhi in a second here, but just overall, kind of how do you approach Paul George as far as just the reality that if he ever figures it out, I mean, this could be a ridiculously boom game. On the other hand, you roster him, especially paying a captain price for him or slotting him in one of the spots in FanDuel, and you're getting more of that kind of mixed reaction. That's a waste of money, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think George is a good play. You know, he's playing huge minutes. He's averaging like 40 minutes per game in the postseason. He played 43.5 minutes last game. He's averaged 1.14 DraftKings points per minute this postseason. All of that's really good. The only knock that I have on George is in comparison to Donovan Mitchell, because, you know, yeah, I think it's likely that George plays a few minutes more than Mitchell, but you're talking about, you know, again, George averaging 1.14 DraftKings points per minute this postseason. Mitchell is at like 1.5, almost 1.5, 1.48 for the regular season. Mitchell averaged 1.3 DraftKings points per minute. But if you take out, if Mike Conley does sit, you get an increased usage rate and an increased assist percentage for Mitchell. So to me, those few minutes aren't quite enough to make up the difference, especially if George is getting more ownership. So it's not that I dislike George. I think he's a very good play. I think the salary is reasonable. I think the minutes are great. I think everything looks good. It's just, to me, I would just rather find the money for Mitchell.
All right, we have a lot of things to look at. I know it's one game, and trust me, I don't keep saying that, but take advantage of the NBA player rankings. First and foremost, they're free today. And a bunch of other stuff is actually affordable and easy to get to. It's $29.95 a week for Awesemo Plus. It's an amazing package. You get access to everything, every single thing that is available to us. NBA DFS, strictly streamlined. That's fine. The Awesemo Plus NBA Weekly package runs $16.95. The $4.95 NBA Weekly Express package. But here's the thing. With Awesemo Plus at $29.95, the NBA season is not going to be much longer. Why not take advantage of everything now? Why not jump in Awesemo Plus across the board? Start looking at MMA fights. Start looking at PGA events. Start looking at baseball. You see the hat and everything there? We're going to get ready to start getting deeper into baseball season. So you want to be prepared and you want to have the tools accordingly. And look, new members get 15% off your first week of Awesemo Plus Platinum. Just use the code, which is our show, NBA Strategy Show. All caps, one word, as you see, NBA Strategy Show. Adam, let's look at kind of two realities here. Mike Conley plays, Mike Conley doesn't play. Mike Conley plays, it factors in, I would imagine, the people below him, because like when Donovan Mitchell returned, minutes, usage, all these things were sucked away. So I'm assuming that it's going to impact people below him versus if Conley's out, kind of the same scenario we talked about earlier in the week where he missed time.
Yeah, if Conley comes back, it just changes everything because we don't know exactly how many minutes he would play. And at $9,000 on DraftKings, you would need him to be pretty close to full strength. But what it really affects is, I already mentioned it with Mitchell. Mitchell's usage rate and his assist percentage both go up if Conley plays. So if Conley comes back, Mitchell's still a good play, but his projection does decrease. But where it really makes a difference is Jordan Clarkson and Joe Ingles. Ingles would move back to the bench, you assume, and go from playing, 32 minutes to 22 to 24 is what we were seeing in the Memphis series when Conley was at full strength. So you're losing those minutes for Ingles. You're most likely going to lose minutes for Clarkson as well, instead of getting the 28 minutes per game that he averaged this season. And he's played similar in the postseason without Conley. You're getting him going back to 22 to 24 minutes where, Ingles' salary and Clarkson's salary with Conley being out have both increased a bit. They would become not really viable options if Conley's back and not extremely limited.
All right. I'm just curious. Look, we've got a lot of time. There's no reason to lock something in right now and forget it and then watch the game. So clearly everybody's going to be paying attention across the day and really across the board for news with Conley. Your gut, if Conley's active, how are you personally approaching rosters?
If Conley's active, I think it's just going to force a lot of ownership onto the Clippers because, like I said, it's going to decrease. It's going to basically take away Clarkson and Ingles, who, if Conley is inactive, are reasonable options. It's going to lower Mitchell's projection to where, Paul George probably does look a little bit better. The only guy on the Jazz that I don't think would really be affected is Rudy Gobert.
Yeah.
Because he's not a high usage guy anyway. He's going to get his minutes with or without Conley. O'Neal and Bogdanovich not really affected by Conley either, but neither of them are super appealing options anyway. So if Conley's back, it's just going to make the Jazz as a whole less appealing because you're getting someone that picks up a lot of assists, someone that's going to play minutes, and someone that is a relatively high usage guy as well. And he's taking away from, other guys on Utah. So it's just going to make the Clippers look a little bit more appealing relative to the Utah players.
So looking at, and I actually saw something on the chat I want to get back to real quick, but just kind of in that vein of Rudy Gobert seeming to be alongside Mitchell. Again, Mitchell's definitely can get boosted with the return of Conley, as you laid out, but building a FanDuel lineup and working in the MVP, the star, and then ultimately the pro there, seems like Gobert would probably be the most trusted pro that you can lock if you were going to roster Kawhi and George up top.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, like his minutes are just going to be there. He's kind of, what you're getting from Gobert. He's like a 1.2 to 1.3 fantasy point per minute guy. He's playing 33 to 36 minutes. reasonable price tag. And but he's not, when you're talking FanDuel, where you don't have the salary multiplier, so there's no real reason to get too creative at the top in MVP. Like I think at the top you're playing George, Kawhi, Mitchell, so it makes sense for Gobert to be the next guy in.
Yeah, and kind of on that, again, just looking at the FanDuel lineup specifically here with the ability to kind of maneuver with those three slots and with Kawhi Leonard also in DraftKings. But how do you approach Kawhi tonight, knowing that Conley in, Conley out, there's going to be high ownership for Kawhi. If anybody's leaning heavy on the Clippers, even with Paul George, there's going to be a ton in this one game slate on Kawhi Leonard. So is he an automatic captain for you? Is he somebody that you're just simply working in lineups on DK? And then how do you anticipate slotting him on FanDuel?
I'm interested to see how the ownership ends up shaking out there, because right now we have Kawhi projected for more ownership, more captain ownership rather, on DraftKings, more total ownership as well than Donovan Mitchell. So that's another one. In our ownership projections, we have Conley projected in, so I think that's why you're getting the Clippers guys ahead of Mitchell. But with Kawhi, it's kind of tough because like he's $1,000 more expensive than Paul George. He's going to have a similar projection. George probably plays a minute or two more than Kawhi. We saw 43 minutes to 38 last game, but in the postseason, they've both averaged a little over or right around 40 minutes. Kawhi's the better fantasy producer at about 1.3 fantasy points per minute to George's 1.14. But in terms of range of outcomes and even median projection relative to salary, George is going to look a little bit better. So I'm interested to see where the ownership ends up coming in at, because if Kawhi is projected to be similarly owned to Paul George, I would rather go to George. But if you are getting a pretty big gap, and right now it's like 1.5 to 1 in favor of George, then I think you start looking to Kawhi for the lower ownership. But like in cash games, I think you would just be looking to George or Mitchell.
Yeah, crunching a lineup now without Conley. I took Conley out, and Mitchell's rising for sure, definitely on as opposed to the first crunch. But as your point remains, where, and we'll get to some of the guys more in the middle, like Marcus Morris, who was right there in between as far as ownership is, or as far as projection is concerned, Kawhi and George, but it's Kawhi Leonard across the board. So now it's all about getting creative, right? So this goes back to the big picture question about when we have the one game slate. Everybody's going to be running in some sort of fashion with Kawhi Leonard, I would think, more so than maybe even George and Mitchell as well. So it's going to be the hardest guy on the floor to fade. So how do we get creative with a lot of these guys? Are we looking now at somebody at the bottom, like these super low-cost Derek Favors or somebody like that, to captain in order just to slot in everybody else and really be different up top?
Yeah, I don't know that I'd want to go I don't know that I want to go the route, paying up or paying down at captain necessarily. But I do think that the cheap guys on the Clippers in particular are going to be useful. We don't know what that starting lineup's going to look like, but you have a $1,600 Patrick Beverley who is back in the rotation. He played, like 6 minutes in game one. Tyronn Lue said he wanted to play him more, and then he played 21 minutes last game. So he's probably going to be the best point per dollar, projected value. Zubac started last game, was abused in the pick and roll, as I think everyone except Tyronn Lue, I guess, expected. So don't really know if they're going to go back to Zubac or not. But, at 3,400, that's still a spot where you can roll the dice and hope that he plays the 20 minutes he played in game one. Even, DeMarcus Cousins at 1,400 in tournaments, he played 11 minutes last game. There's guys you can pay down for. You mentioned Favors on the Utah side. I think he's the one that stands out. You're hoping, if you roster Favors, you're hoping for foul trouble for Gobert. But even if you don't get it, you're still getting, 13 or so minutes for Favors at 1,800. So there's those guys to pay down for. It's just, I don't think I really want to go to captain there, because between Mitchell, George, and Kawhi, there's just such a good chance that one of those guys is putting up a monster game in the captain spot that you're going to be making up a lot of ground if you pay down.
So I saw this point there. Patrick Azer makes Jazz up 2-0. No need for Conley to come back early. I think he sits. And even if he plays, I wonder how much do you factor a point like that in where, look, especially if they're up in this game. Let's say that Mike Conley's active, he's playing, and they're up like we've seen them get up after the first quarter. And now all of a sudden you have a 6-7 point lead on the road. Yeah, it's nice to get them back. It's nice to work them in. But at the same time, you may not feel pressure to continue to play him. And that may hurt not only his minutes, but may positively impact and kind of go back to this pre-Conley mentality of him not playing. So it's really complicated, and I don't know how you can apply any other variables to this scenario, Adam.
Yeah, I think the fact that Conley's not inexpensive is kind of helpful too, because you don't have to worry too much about this conversation. Like if Conley were 7K or 7,500 on DraftKings, you would really have to worry about, okay, well, is he going to play 25 minutes or is he going to play 33 minutes? Because it really, really matters. At 9K, it's less important because as long as Conley doesn't get his full run right out of the gate, he's not really going to show up as a great option. But I agree with that point. One, it being there's no sense of urgency for Utah to get him back. They've been winning without him. They can afford, even though obviously they would rather not, they can afford to lose a game here if that happens. So there's no sense of urgency to get him back. And I would expect if he does come back that they're very cautious with him, not running him into the ground out of the gate.
Pretty ridiculous. And it's Odd Shopper, of course, where we go everywhere. Oddshopper.awesemo.com. You can get everything from projected player props to the upcoming matchups across the board, not just for the NBA, for everything that you can find. And the beauty, of course, is that everything is there for you. Everything is sitting here. All of the work is done for you to where we've shopped everything, and you can just go to the book of choice on Odd Shopper and lay a number. But as comfortable as Utah has looked, and yes, it's a different scenario for Utah and a couple of teams when they play at home. I get it because they're so damn good at home. And yes, the Clippers have won on the road, and maybe that was even more deflating. But I was a little surprised to see this line at 5. And especially since we've seen some pretty tight lines for series that had a similar feel to this. This was pretty shocked, like the Milwaukee-Brooklyn thing. I know Milwaukee won in hindsight and all, but this is pretty surprising to me that there is this level of confidence from the books, Adam, that the Clippers are going to handle business.
Yeah, I did a double take when I saw the line this morning. It just wasn't what I was expecting.
So, and again, nothing is just like with raw betting to no house advantage, which we'll tell you about today, to running rosters. There's never one specific thing that you lean on, but when you are building lineups with kind of that in the backdrop, it's hard. It's hard for my brain to think, okay, Donovan Mitchell, Rudy Gobert, this team is going to lose. But I look at something so glaring as that line, and how do you build, even if it's like a couple small percentage of your lineups, how do you build kind of a fade Utah lineup where you can still rock one or two guys in there, but for the most part, you're working as many Clippers as possible?
Well, I think the pricing kind of helps with that too, because the Utah guys in general just aren't that favorably priced. Like Donovan Mitchell, of course, looks really good, but he's also really expensive. Gobert is priced up a bit. Even Clarkson and Ingles are more expensive than they have been. So Utah just isn't really that favorably priced anyway. Whereas you look to the Clippers and, Kawhi is a little bit more than Mitchell, but George is less expensive. Marcus Morris is sub 5K. Batum, if he were to rejoin the starting lineup, is only 4,200. If Zubac stays in the starting lineup, he's 3,400. You're just getting, and then we already talked about Pat Beverly at 16. So you're just getting much more favorable pricing, I think, on the Clippers anyway. And then, of course, their projections are just going to look a little bit better because they're favored by 5 points. They have a 114 implied total. That, of course, is where what any projection system is using as the baseline is, the Clippers being, having a 114 implied total. So it's going to make them look a little bit better anyway. And then they're relatively inexpensive.
I don't know if you ever believe in what is it? There's comfort in numbers. It's one of those phrases, something like that, right? Where it's like, if you find, misery loves company. I think that's what it is, right?
Yeah.
So I feel a lot better that there are other people that got burned in some capacity by Danny Green leaving early last night due to injury, because I feel like part of our job this early on the strategy show, the majority of it is looking ahead, Adam, but a lot of it should be consoling people on the metaphorical couch from what happened the night before.
Yeah, last night, definitely a night that I'm glad I switched to primarily playing cash games, because like a lot of people are complaining about Kevin Huerter, which I had him, but so did everyone else. So it didn't really matter. Still, had a decent night, but yeah, really, really brutal night from a lot of the value last night. Huerter was bad. JaMychal Green was bad. You mentioned Danny Green getting hurt. Yeah, it was a pretty brutal slate in terms of cheap guys.
And is that just the strategy then now moving forward on these shorter slates down to 2-1, where you can just take advantage of if somebody like Donovan Mitchell, Rudy Gobert, foul trouble, Kawhi Leonard, God forbid, gets hurt, right? Something like this happens in that cash game that you mentioned. you're not the only one who's getting bit in the rear by any means.
Yeah, it's definitely kind of nice in cash. I mean, the downside is you get so much overlap. You know, it can be hard to win. I think cash for the playoffs has been softer than it was during the regular season, I think. But the benefit to that overlap is frequently, you know, the guy that in tournaments, you know, oh, I have a lot of Kevin Huerter, my night's over, I can't win a tournament with Kevin Huerter. In cash is kind of like, yeah, okay, everyone else has him, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, Kevin Huerter, a lot of lineups burned with that line. What do you have? Third foul in like halfway through the second. You just knew it, man. Like they just kept going after him, and you just knew it. The abuse was in full effect.
Yeah, ended up playing 23 minutes, including like the last 3 minutes of the game when it was already out of hand.
Absolutely over. Absolutely. Speaking of which, saw this one here, and a lot of it had to do with your point about Rudy Gobert, the minutes that are going to be out there. Seems like as we have a ton of exposure on our lineup crunchers here to Zubac, and you mentioned the point about just Ty Lue going back, and it seems to that expectation of it. You know, Gobert on Odd Shopper is sitting at 13.5, which may seem high, but I think under these circumstances in this matchup, especially because there's some pretty good value on the over, and knowing that there's a lot of confidence, it looks like just across the board with our projections of what he can turn into, that seems like a pretty good over to me, Adam.
On Gobert?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's a good spot for him regardless. I mean, he's obviously got the size advantage if the Clippers go small. If they don't, it's, you know, still not the end of the world with Zubac. So, yeah, I'm with you. I think it looks good.
Now, on the flip side, they're just with Zubac, and how much of it is just how difficult it is to trust him following what happened last game?
Yeah, it's incredibly difficult because you saw it in the Dallas series that the Mavs just when Zubac was in the game, they just attacked and you know forced the Clippers to switch and took advantage of Zubac. Luka Doncic averages the second most pick and roll possessions per game during the regular season. Donovan Mitchell was fourth. So you've got another, you know, ball dominant star on Utah that if Zubac is on the floor, he's just going to put Utah or put the Clippers rather in a bad situation where they can't really defend him. So I thought it was a weird switch from Tyronn Lue when he did it. And then immediately the Jazz just came out and took advantage of it. So it's really, really risky if Zubac does start because on the one hand, he's inexpensive and he's a good per minute fantasy producer. So if he somehow plays 24 minutes at $3,400 and you don't have him, you're in trouble. But on the other hand, if he starts, he's going to be relatively popular because it's a one-game slate. He's cheap and he's starting. And there's a pretty good chance that he just doesn't play a lot of minutes because it's a rough matchup for him, and Donovan Mitchell is going to go nuts as long as they're on the floor together. So it's a tough spot if he starts. I'm just hoping that they go back to Batum and we don't really have to worry about it because what'll be interesting is if Batum moves into the starting lineup, you'll see ownership on Zubac come down because, you know, he burned people last game and then he's moving back to the bench, but you could still get those minutes off the bench to where, you know, we saw it in game one. He can play enough minutes off the bench to where he's still a good play at 3,400 at much lower ownership. If he starts, though, you're going to see that ownership come up because people are just going to feel a little bit more comfortable. And I think there's still a ton of risk.
Yeah, Batum at 4,200 DK, I mean, 600 less than Morris, seems to be one of the best plays as far as value is concerned on the board. Morris, I would imagine, as well, but just the difference in cost. The only concern would just be ownership at this point. But then again, dealing in the captain MVP modes that we are, I don't even know how you get around that.
Yeah, I think that Morris looks like a really good value. I mean, he's been in the starting lineup. He projects better if they go with the small lineup because his rebounding chances increase when he's not playing alongside Zubac. But either way, he's going to look like a good value just based on the playing time that we've seen all postseason long when he's not in foul trouble. He played 37 minutes last game. Batum is, I think, more of a tournament dart throw. Like if he's coming off the bench, you don't really know what you're going to get out of him. He played 27.5 minutes last game, which is great. But again, that's dependent on him getting minutes over Zubac, who not only did Zubac play poorly last game, or was did Mitchell have success when Zubac was out there? But Zubac was also in foul trouble. So you can't just look at Zubac's minutes last game and say, oh, Tyronn Lue realized he made a mistake. Zubac picked up 2 fouls in the first 3 minutes and 46 seconds, picked up his third foul 1 minute and 22 seconds after subbing back in. So that's one reason you didn't see a lot of minutes for Zubac, and you saw more minutes for Nicholas Batum. If Zubac starts and you just get normal rotations, you're probably talking about Batum playing 20 to 22 minutes instead of close to 28. So he's another one where I'm going to feel a lot more confident in Batum if he starts than if he comes off the bench.
Yeah, and looking on the flip side here, Royce O'Neal, I mean, again, a lot of this as far as Bogdanovich, Ingles, right? We talk about Mike Conley and how that may impact it. But if there's somebody that you can look at that may be, again, kind of in that middle range that might not be and he's going to be higher than both Morris and Batum. I recognize that, 54K or 5,400, pardon me, on DraftKings. But is Royce O'Neal kind of a middle guy you can get to that's a little less affected with the Conley issue?
Yeah, because O'Neal's, again, he's someone that doesn't have a high usage rate. He's got like a 10% usage rate for the season. So he's not really losing anything when Conley comes back. He's not losing minutes. And with O'Neal, you're hoping he gets some defensive stats. You're hoping he gets rebounds, does a good enough job of rebounding, picking up a couple assists to round out his stat line. He's like a 0.75 to 0.8 fantasy point per minute guy, but he played 40 minutes last game. And that's not something that's really going to be affected by Conley, I don't think. So O'Neal is kind of just with or without Conley. O'Neal is someone that I think works as like a last piece in. It's a reasonable price tag. He's pretty likely to give you like right around 5x, but he's definitely not someone that I'm singling out and trying to get to as like one of my first guys.
I was laughing at Theodore Parson on the stream there in my head as he mentioned seeing Lou Will in the winning lineup for 100K made him want to scream. Now it's one game, one slate, kind of equivalent to the home run pick you'd give out at the end of an MLB show. But who's going to be tonight's Lou Will in the starting lineup that wins all of the money, Adam?
Patrick Beverley, I think, is the obvious answer.
Yeah.
1,600, playing 21 minutes last game. Not even projected for a lot of ownership right now, which is really weird. I think that.
Why do you think that is?
I have no idea. I really have no idea. He's to me like the obvious value guy that you should go to. But I would say him if you're going a little bit more off the board, like less obvious. I think it's either Favors or Cousins.
All right. We talked a little bit about this as far as how this worked last time. It was the Denver game, I believe, that we had the captain mode and MVP mode we were discussing. So similarly here, and it was brief that you brought it up, but as new people pop in, not only do we remind you, as far as not asking much about hitting us up with a like, pound that button. Also, you want to share and really subscribe to the channel. It does wonders for us here at Awesemo. So make sure you are subscribed to everything that we're doing. You can hit that notification bell and never miss a show. Imagine that. You can be here early even and jump in the chat and ask what flavor slushy Adam is rocking with. And look at that transition. This is like Booker going right to left in the air right there. He goes right hand slushy, left hand Gatorade, and it's both the same color.
Yeah. Needed a break from the sugar.
All right. Also, I forgot where I was going because of that. Because of the slushy. I'm derailed off of the slushy. No, what I was going to ask is Beverly, can you get away with captaining it? Can you get away with rostering him as your captain? Can you be as bold as that, knowing that you can have your way now with your roster?
Yeah, so I'm playing around with it now on DraftKings, and he's 2,400 at captain, which if you put him in there, it leaves you $9,520. So like obviously, if you go Beverly, the idea is that you want to get all of those expensive guys in. So if you go Beverly and then you put in Leonard, Mitchell, George, Gobert, you still have $5,200. So you get a pretty solid lineup. Beverly captain with like Leonard, Mitchell, George, Gobert, Morris. The problem is that like everyone that plays Beverly at captain is going to play that lineup basically. Like it's probably going to be a pretty heavily duped lineup, which isn't the end of the world, but it's also not ideal. I think to me it looks more like something I would do in cash than something I would do in a tournament, because again, I think that with the combination of Leonard, Mitchell, and George, there's a pretty decent chance that the highest scoring lineup tonight, in tournaments has one of those guys at captain, because they just put up a monster score and you're giving up a lot of points by not having them. But from a cash standpoint where, you're trying to increase your floor and get exposure to all of the really good players on the slate, it does look pretty good where, you're paying down a captain, but it's letting you get all of those really expensive guys that you can't get together if you, play Mitchell or George.
Is there a fourth option outside of the obvious three and maybe a fifth option, because you have the three guys up top in Kawhi, George, and Donovan Mitchell, depending on game flow, narrative, how this thing plays out. And also, as you mentioned, the race to the bottom to captain Patrick Beverley so everybody can be fit in your roster. But is there a pivot to that, even to where you can justify Batum, where you can justify Morris, where you can justify somebody in the middle, knowing that it may not get you everybody, but it's also a result of what you believe the game flow could be, which is maybe you do believe the line and you think the Clippers are going to smack Utah in game 3. Is there a way in which you can get to that and justify somebody more in the middle as the captain, again, expecting a pretty big boom, but also realizing that bust comes with it as well?
Yeah, I think going mid-range is actually pretty difficult on the slate. And the reason is that just the way the pricing works out, like I was just saying, if you put Beverly at captain, you can get Gobert, George, Leonard, Mitchell, all together. If you use, let's say, Mitchell at captain, you can get Leonard and George, but you have to forego Gobert and, pay down for Beverly at flex. But if you use Marcus Morris or any of these mid-range guys, they're expensive enough to where you still can't get the whole Leonard, Mitchell, Paul. You can't get Leonard, Mitchell, George, and Gobert. You can still only get 3 of them. And so you're in a just kind of a weird situation where it's okay, well, is it really worth it to use Morris at captain instead of George when all it's really gaining me is that I get to play, Royce O'Neal instead of Patrick Beverley at utility? Is that really worth it? And to me, I think the answer is that it's pretty unlikely to be the case. So I think I would rather either punt captain and just, hope for the best from Beverly, Favors, Cousins, whoever, even though, I don't think that's the best way to go. I think that's a better way than going mid-range.
Do you ever work, though? I'm just curious in general. Are you ever working the mid-range if cost is permitting in the one-game slates on either FanDuel or DraftKings?
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to what is available on the slate. A couple of days ago, when we had the one-game slate with the Suns and the Nuggets, I used Chris Paul at captain. He was low owned in cash. I think it was 8% captain in cash, but I went there and, it worked really well because just the way the pricing was on that slate, I was able to play him at captain, still get, Jokic and flex. And then it got me, I don't remember, but, Devin Booker and whatever else I wanted. DeAndre Ayton, I think, was a big piece. But yeah, so it really depends on the mid-range guy, and it depends on what else is on the slate. There's no mid-range equivalent of Chris Paul on this slate. The really good players are all expensive. Reggie Jackson, as good as he's played, he's not Chris Paul. So if you on this slate, if you had Chris Paul at 7,600, I would say by all means play Chris Paul because he's a really good player who is capable of putting up a score that's similar to Mitchell or Leonard or George. But there's nobody from these two teams in that range. Gobert would be the one guy that isn't named Leonard, Mitchell, or George that you could see realistically being the highest scorer on the slate, but he's not cheap either. So you just don't really get that upside from any of the mid-range guys tonight.
Yeah, Josh Nork on the premium Slack kind of echoing that sentiment part of me, Adam, about thinking Paul George isn't close to the top MVP option and kind of maneuvering it around. But just kind of to your point, it's been something that you've talked about where the numbers are there. I think this is where a lot of times the narrative or the optics outside of DFS cloud what somebody's specifically doing on the floor. And Paul George is probably the best example, I think, in the NBA of that, right?
Yeah, it's definitely, you get that a lot. People have strong opinions on guys like Paul George, and realistically, you can say what you want about how he's performed this postseasons in general, but he's still averaging 1.14 DraftKings points per minute, and he's still playing huge minutes. So when you're just talking about DFS, it's really different than, what he's doing as far as helping the Clippers.
Should we just nix the Boogie Cousins love right now that I see growing up on the stream, or is there something to that?
There's something to it as far as he's really cheap, and So again, like assuming Patrick Beverley's ownership comes up, the way it is right now, if Patrick Beverley really is projected for 20% ownership as we approach lock, just play Patrick Beverley a ton because he's just way under owned at that ownership. But assuming he comes up and you get a big gap between Beverley and Cousins, that's where there starts to be some value on Cousins in tournaments. You're not even saying, oh, I think DeMarcus Cousins is going to have a good game. You're basically saying, I think DeMarcus Cousins is going to play minutes. He played like 4 minutes and then 11 minutes. And you're basically just saying, okay, I'm going to build that same lineup that I could build with Patrick Beverley, but I'm going to play DeMarcus Cousins instead. I understand that Beverly's the better play, but because of ownership, if Cousins beats Beverly, which let's say Beverly plays 20 minutes, let's say Cousins plays like 12, he's probably going to beat Beverly like, I don't know, 40% of the time, something like that. You're just saying, okay, well, I'll just, leapfrog the Beverly team. So it's purely, to me, the reason to consider Cousins is, one, only in tournaments, and two, it's dependent on the ownership gap between Patrick Beverly and DeMarcus Cousins. You're not looking at it like you think Cousins is going to do well. You're just looking at it, how much can I benefit if DeMarcus Cousins outscores Patrick Beverly in this one game?
Okay, so I imagine other guys are going to be in that similar situation. Luke Kennard, right? We've seen Terrence Mann. We've seen guys at the bottom who you can justify a punt with a captain on. Clearly, Patrick Beverly, as you've reinforced, and we'll see how the ownership tails with that or not. But I imagine that those other guys are probably in a maybe a little bit of a better, but still similar situation as Boogie's in.
Yeah, but the problem is that, like, Kennard, well, for one, he only played 10 minutes last game after playing, I think, 28 the game before, but he's also more expensive. He's $3K, I believe, on DraftKings. Yeah, he's $3K. Terrence Mann hasn't even been in the rotation the last couple of games. Rondo didn't leave the bench last game, but even he's $3,200. So looking at those like sub 2K guys, the only guys that you really expect to play are Favors, Beverly, and Cousins.
Favors, Beverly, and Cousins. Those are the only punts across the board at the bottom of the slate.
Yeah, I mean, those, like, Oni, if Conley's out, Oni probably plays like 6 minutes or something. But outside of that, the only guys that you're expecting to leave the bench at less than $2,000 are Favors, Beverly, Cousins. Niang's at 2K. Played 9 minutes last game. But yeah, it's, you obviously, if you're going to roll the dice and get away from Beverly, you still want it to be someone that's actually in the rotation.
All right, I know you said no based on cost, and you can't get it to the lineup as far as the ideal optimal lineup with 4 guys in there, or at least the top 3 beyond. But let's just go back to Mike Conley being out here, and then we're going to explain in a second. Once Adam's done dropping this knowledge on you, we're going to drop some other about No House Advantage and show you why there is an amazing advantage that you have, especially specifically with what's happening with Mike Conley. But just follow me here. Mike Conley's out. You go to Joe Ingles as captain. I understand it goes against your principle, every principle you have about paying up for a guy like that in the middle. And I'm not here to move you off of your rock. I promise, brother. But this specific small example, can you be moved just a little bit to that?
It's still really tough. Like, I actually thought it made sense last Showdown slate. So the last game you had Ingles, I think he was like 4,700 on the Showdown slate 2 days ago. And you could build a really good lineup with Ingles at captain. And actually it was my cash lineup until Zubac started and I switched and lost all my money. But
you're not supposed to say that publicly.
Yeah. But you could build a really good lineup because Ingles was cheap enough where you could put him at captain. You could get to, Mitchell, George, Kawhi, whatever it was, and build a really good lineup. Pat Beverly was 1K. He was the guy that you kind of used to round it out. Today, though, that increase on Ingles up to 6K is enough to where he's just, you're getting, I think you're getting too similar of a lineup with Ingles at captain as if you go Paul George at captain. Like if you put Ingles at captain, then you put in Leonard, Mitchell, George at utility, it leaves you $4,100. So you're going to have to go, if you go Beverly, then you can get to like Royce O'Neal. If you go Zubac, you can get Marcus Morris. But the point being, like, you're just getting a small upgrade from like Patrick Beverly to Zubac, if that's even an upgrade, but by going from, George to Ingles. And to me, that's just not enough of a bump to justify it.
So as mentioned, Mike Conley has been a big topic. He is the injury that we're waiting on. And as soon as the news comes out, everybody's going to rush to adjust or set their lineups accordingly. But the bigger issue when it comes to trying to take advantage of it from a betting standpoint specifically is the lines are going to move. Everything. Player props, especially if Conley's out, you're going to lose all of the value for guys like Joe Ingles. You're going to lose a ton of you're going to lose a lot of these guys immediately because they catch up to it. So at no house advantage, where you can take full advantage, baseball, NBA, PGA stuff going on now, wait until football season starts and beyond, all for cash prizes. And of course, we have a promo code for you, Awesemo, to receive a $20 first match deposit. But just looking at how this works, it's not going to change. So the belief right now could be on no house advantage, for example, that Mike Conley is not going to play. So lines are set for guys like Joe Ingles specifically with the expectation that he's going to go out there and fill that gap, right? Makes sense. He'd go out there and fill that void. Well, what happens if Conley's ruled out an hour before tip? Everybody's going to be scrambling to place wagers on books. Meanwhile, you come back here and say, whoa, those lines haven't moved, because they don't. At no house advantage, it doesn't matter if somebody's hurt. It doesn't matter if somebody's ruled out. It doesn't matter the circumstance. It's locked in, and you're locked in with how you see it. So the benefits are there exponentially. You can use it as far as a guide for prop bets on books as well. Strongly recommend it. And again, no house advantage is the spot to go. Awesemo is our promo code, $20 first match deposit. And you were one of the first people that put me onto that, as far as not moving. And it's like amazing, right? We're both waiting for this thing to be fully legal in our respective states, you in Maryland, me in PA. But just using this as a guide for props is one thing. And then seeing how they just don't move, like you don't get that in the betting world. It's amazing.
Yeah, for sure. Obviously you get you get a lot of stuff opening up. It's kind of similar to normal DFS, where you get news and then you just get very underpriced players. Here you're just getting, value props basically.
So I don't know. We didn't ask Chris ahead of time if he has it, but is it time to roll out the taps for playoff Rondo? Is that a thing of the past now?
I think so.
How shocked would you be if he broke the slate? Come on.
Yeah, I mean, Ty Lue's going to do Ty Lue things, but the thing with Rondo is that even 2 games ago, and I'm not saying this like to sound smart in hindsight, but like 2 games ago, the game that he played 28 minutes, if you actually looked at that rotation, he didn't even sub in until like the second quarter. It didn't really look like Tyronn Lue wanted to play him. And then you had Reggie Jackson in foul trouble. So then Rondo played a ton in the second half. I thought he would. I thought it was likely he would still play last game, but the rotation was weird, even though he played 28 minutes 2 games ago. And then you had, Lue saying he wanted to play Beverly more. There's only so many minutes to go around. Reggie Jackson's playing. If Beverly's going to play more, those minutes have to come from somewhere. And you have Kennard in the rotation too. So I'm expecting Beverly to just be ahead of Rondo, particularly in this series. Maybe that changes if the Clippers advance and, different matchup and all that. But my expectation is that Beverly's just ahead of Rondo.
Yeah, and again, as far as like how it goes at the bottom, you pretty much covered the punt, especially with Beverly kind of looking at from a captain standpoint. And I imagine that kind of stays the same with FanDuel as well. I'm just trying to see as far as updated ownership. Look, it's really early. We're going to be on for another 10 or so minutes anyway, so I can't imagine much changes here drastically. But I do wonder if or how much ownership would have you moving away from these cheaper owned guys, including Derek Favors and Zubac specifically, to where there is a number where you think, all right, everybody's on these guys. I need to find a pivot from an ownership standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and those guys are good examples because of the volatility. And in Zubac's case, the pricing, he's inexpensive, but he's not free like Beverly is. So, the ownership right now, we have 30% going to Zubac. If he starts, I think that's a pretty reasonable number, maybe a little bit low. Because the one thing that I do want to reiterate is, he didn't look very good defensively in that game. But I still think if you look at the rotation, he lost his minutes because of foul trouble more so than anything else. He played 8 minutes and 38 seconds to start the second half. If you assume that he's going to play 3 stints, like if you assume the Clippers are going to close small, but that Zubac is going to play, the first quarter, the second quarter, and the third quarter, you're still talking, like 20 to 24 minutes at a cheap price tag. So right now, I actually think 30% is low if Zubac is starting. If he's not starting, then, all bets are off. But if that ownership came up to, I don't know, 50%, I would start to back off, I think.
How often do you think at all? And again, just looking at this is all based off Conley being out. So just want to preface that on a couple of DK lineups that I crunched for you, Adam. And it's not as far down, pardon me, as I thought. I mean, I'm like, 13, 14 lineup here off Awesemo's projections before I get to Rudy as the captain. Do you anticipate getting too many lineups with Gobert exposed as your captain?
I don't, but I think that it makes sense in tournaments as long as the ownership is relatively low. The problem I have is right now we're getting like the same captain ownership on Gobert as you are on Mitchell. I would just rather go Mitchell. But that's another one where, maybe, again, we have Conley projected in our ownership projection. So if you take Conley out, maybe that number.
It doesn't. That was my point, is that let me just hold on. Let me double check. Yeah, he's out. I just wanted to triple check here. He's out. And you're exactly right.
We have Conley projected for 19% ownership.
No, I'm sorry. When I crunched these lineups, I unselected Conley. So I took him out of him being crunched in these lineups. And I still get, and I'm sure I might be misreading something, but I still get the same splits as you had with the full crunch.
I see what you're saying. Yeah. But the thing, like, if Conley is out, Mitchell's projection is going to increase too.
He's going to go significantly higher.
Right. And so that's like, that's why I'm saying it makes a difference, because like if you assume Conley's going to play, you're going to project Mitchell's ownership to be lower because his projection is lower. But if you assume Conley's not going to play, Mitchell's projection increases, which will increase his ownership projection.
Fair enough.
So that's kind of thing. Like I would, if they're going to be similarly owned, I would just rather find the money for Mitchell than Gobert. But I think, we've talked a lot about the mid-range guys not really having that potential to give you a slate winning score. And I don't think you're getting enough of a benefit elsewhere in your lineup. Gobert is kind of the exception to that. He's not a mid-range guy because he is expensive, but Gobert is like the one guy that isn't Mitchell, George, or Kawhi that you could realistically see going for like 50 plus fantasy points and being a really, really useful captain. So if you are going to get low ownership on Gobert compared to those other three, then I think it's an interesting play in tournaments.
Okay, so let's follow this through here, right? And tonight may be the best example of why you really need to think outside of the box if you're going to place top 3 and make the Awesemo Hall of Fame. Because remember last time, the other night, it was like a week ago, right, where everybody won. And everybody thought they were going to make the Awesemo Hall of Fame, but no. And real quick, before that, Adam, just let's further this scenario here. All right, Mike Conley is out. We know that. We'll start there on that assumption. Mike Conley is out, so that increases everything that with Donovan Mitchell. I just want to add that factor in there. We're also locked into Rudy Gobert as the captain because, as you mentioned, there could be a little bit of a pivot path to having Gobert as your captain. It also is going to mean now that you can't roster all 3 of the other guys. So using the data that I gave you, which is Conley is out, which one of the 3 from Kawhi to PG to Mitchell are you going to leave out of your lineup?
I mean, I think the first one is just Kawhi because of price. And so it kind of the way that I'm thinking about it is knowing you can only go 2 of Kawhi, Mitchell, and George. I mean, you have Gobert captains, so like you still could just play George and Kawhi, but to some extent, George and Kawhi are negatively correlated. Like if George has a monster game, he's probably taking at least a little bit away from Kawhi. So I would, in my first lineup with Gobert captain, I would probably drop one of Kawhi or George. Kawhi is obviously more expensive, so he would be the one that I take out first. And looking at what it leaves you, like if you have Gobert captain, you have Mitchell, you have George, you get $4,733 per position. If you go Patrick Beverly, it opens it up to $6,300. So you can do something like Morris and Reggie Jackson, which looks pretty good. It gives you some options. So, and if you don't go Beverly, then, you can do stuff like Zubac, Morris, Ingles, which also looks pretty good. So you do get some I think, pretty solid builds with Gobert, captain.
D. Owens 89 on the super chat, and this now assumes the opposite. So let's look at Mike Conley being in, and D. Owens 89 asking if you could ever at all in your mind get to on your lineup some exposure to Conley as a captain.
It's really, really risky. Like, if we knew Conley's full strength, I would say yes. Like, if he was 9K and we just never had this hamstring injury and he had played his normal minutes in the first 2 games of the series and all that, I would say Conley is in that Gobert category where I'd still prefer the other guys, but Conley at least has the potential to give you that monster game. The reason I think it's really risky is that I don't really anticipate, even if he comes back, I don't anticipate Utah really pushing him. Not saying that you're going to get him limited like Will Barton because, he wasn't out that long, but hamstring injuries can be tough. You can re-aggravate them pretty easily. I just have a hard time thinking Conley comes back and plays 34, 35 minutes. I think it's more likely he's kind of like Chris Paul was in the Lakers series, where if the game's really competitive down the stretch, he's going to play the whole fourth quarter. But if they don't have to do that, they're not going to, and he's likely to play 29, 30 minutes. So I guess the answer is you can. It's really, really risky. And you should be more inclined to take that risk the larger tournament the tournament is that you're playing.
A quick reminder here, beyond, of course, just leaving us with a like, and you've got a lot of programming coming up, including Emac and Terry joining you for the MLB strategy show in a couple of minutes. But like, subscribe. You definitely want to share to the world, let people know about what's going on here. Look, I understand it. You want to be part of the community as well. $29.95 a week for Awesemo Plus. It's a fantastic opportunity. And today, the free tool available to you is the NBA player ranking. So you want to make sure that you're using everything available to you alongside what Adam is telling you and everybody else across the station throughout the sports that we covered today. And a quick reminder as well, if you want to be in the Awesemo Hall of Fame, you need to make sure you follow these quick, brief steps. You want to download the Awesemo profile pic. You see it all over the place. Wherever you finish, if it's right there at the top or right there at the bottom and you want to scroll up, you see these profile pics everywhere. And you can get them from awesemo.com/avatar. Place in the top 3 of a contest with over 5,000 contestants. And yeah, there are rules for ties here. All right. So if you're third and 989 other people are third, chances are that you can't use that victory to get into the Awesemo Hall of Fame. But look, you keep listening, you keep paying attention. If it hasn't already happened, it will. Tweet those wins once it does at Awesemo HOF, and then you'll win a free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum. And you can just see all of the winners. They continue to cycle through. So clearly you and others on this site are doing something, man. If people are listening and winning and continuing to give us props, us meaning collectively and you individually and others that are giving the insight, we have to be doing something right here, right?
Yeah, and it's good to see. I mean, obviously, I care the most about my results, but outside of that, it is nice, when I have a bad night to wake up and see people on Twitter that did well and had success. From reading or watching stuff that we put out, it always feels good.
Spoken like a true sharp, man. Care about me first, my money first, and everybody else. Yeah, once I win, then everybody else is okay. But if I lose, screw the world. You cannot knock that hustle mentality, Adam.
Yeah, it doesn't make it, it doesn't make it all go away if I lose and other people win. No. It's a nice consolation.
It helps soften the blow.
Yeah.
All right, final seconds here before we say goodbye to everybody. And reminder, Emac and Terry coming your way right now for the MLB strategy show. I think we covered everything from top plays to mid-range to some punts. Is there anything from either a strategy or just a reminder or maybe even another name to slide in here before we get out?
No, I mean, I think we touched on pretty much everything. It's kind of a tough one to talk about, this early because you need the Conley news on the Utah side and you need a Clippers starting lineup because there's the potential that they switch it up. So, definitely, not that I would ever recommend it, but don't build a lineup now and then just never look at it again. You need the Conley news. You need to know who the Clippers are starting. You like the Clippers? Or real quick on the way out, 5 points right now in the spread. You like the Clippers with the points, laying the points? I like Utah. Makes me feel better about my pre-show wager. Thank you, sir. Well, to be fair, yes,
You were right on the Simmons last night. You basically told me not to play it, even though, again, I played it pre-show. So you're on a roll telling me what to do. How about that?
Yeah, if you get credit for saying Ben Simmons isn't going to score 20 points, that's a pretty easy win.
Fair enough, my friend. And I'm the idiot who bet it. That's Adam Scherer. Remember, follow him on Twitter at ShipMyMoneyDFS. I'm at Shander Show. Thanks, Chris, as always, producing the show. Thank you to everybody out there for hanging out. But don't go anywhere. MLB Strategy Show coming up next year on Awesemo. Have a great day.